Okay, hello, good evening, afternoon. I'm so glad and happy to chair this session and in the presence of old friends, distinguished scholars and writers. Our topic today is Moroccan American cultural exchanges, and I want to say that this is a significant upgrade from last year, when we had only one major panel in English, and all the credit goes to Dr. Hafsa. I don't want to take much time because I want to give each speaker enough time. Unfortunately, the maximum I can give is 12 minutes, which is unfair, but this is how it goes. You know, by the end of the hour, they would ask us to leave and give the room to some other group. So, very quickly, Moroccan American cultural exchange is a topic on the minds of a number of scholars and writers, historians. And we have a extensive archives for historians to dig into this and obviously tell us more about the various phases and episodes of this history. Also, in terms of political, economic relations between Morocco and the US, as we see in the media, there's plenty to say, and the relations have grown and developed very fast over the last 2 decades. And I was thinking of the free trade agreement, the millennium change, the strategic dialogue. All of these are programs and signposts, if you like, and also the growth of trade, bilateral trade between the two countries. I was also intrigued. We have an anthropologist here that one of the most convenient place for conducting field work by Americans was Morocco, and there's a rich amount of research on various aspects of anthropology, also literature. I don't want to go into that. I'm sure my colleagues here would be able to highlight those aspects. So I have 3 presenters here discussing different aspects of the theme, and I would like to begin with Professor Mhani El-Alawi, who is going to talk about the poetics of Moroccan-American exchange. Dr. Mhani El-Alawi is an award-winning novelist and anthropologist. She received her BA from Duke University and her MA in Arabic Studies from Georgetown University, and her PhD in anthropology from Princeton University, very prestigious university. She's the author of 3 novels, Dreams of Mariam Ter, Ayad Dan, and her most recent novel, published simultaneously in Morocco and the US, The House on Butterfly Street, and I heard that it is on sale in this book fair. I'm looking forward to reading it. I haven't had the chance yet. So without much ado, I will give her the floor, and then I'll introduce each other speaker in time. Go ahead.
Thank you for this introduction, and thank you for doing this in English, for hosting us. It's wonderful to have conferences in Morocco in English. It's really quite nice and refreshing. So about the poetics of Moroccan-American exchanges, my presentation will be more in the form of, I guess, musings, personal musings as well. The title itself made me think quite a lot about what it means, what cultural exchanges mean, what bilateral exchanges mean for a country like the United States, which has so many multilateral cultural exchanges with so many countries, as opposed to a country like Morocco, where we have much less multilateral or bilateral exchanges. And so there's, at the base, for me, there's this kind of very interesting imbalance that I would like you to think about as well, what it means to have exchanges with a country like the United States with such a reach. But before I start, since you mentioned, yes, anthropology, and indeed, a lot of American students do come to Morocco. It was one of their prime sites of research, Morocco, Indonesia, but definitely Morocco. And actually, one of the first, probably the first American anthropologist to do his research in Morocco is Clifford Geertz. And Clifford Geertz was a professor at Princeton University. And he wrote, his whole theory is about thick description. And so for a very long time, anthropologists used thick descriptions to analyze societies like ours, and mostly tribal, rural societies. And so thick description was considered something extremely potent and powerful. But once Moroccan anthropologists like Abdullah Hamoudi, who also teaches, for instance, at Princeton, started critiquing this thick description, it came out as having a colonial aspect. And actually, when Clifford Geertz did his first fieldwork in Morocco, we were still under some kind of French colonial impact. But he never spoke about that power dynamic that was at the heart of the work. It had to come from native anthropologists to recognize that this is a power dynamic, and it was and foreign anthropologists tend to have a blind eye towards these power dynamics, which for us were central. And especially how we define ourselves afterwards, and how we define ourselves as opposed to the West, and in conjunction with the West. How we wanted to engage, whether it was France or Spain or Europe or the United States in general. So that is something that is definitely extremely important, because apart from the social sciences, it is very hard to think about what a country like the United States thinks about Morocco, except for very basic stereotypes. So I will talk about spaces in Morocco, the imaginaries, the collective imaginaries that were constructed by these Moroccan-American exchanges in Morocco via spaces and practices. So to be very down to earth, there are some education, first of all. So we have American schools in Morocco. We have a very good university whose Al Akhawain, whose teaching is American. We have the Fulbright, which is a really powerful program here in Morocco. A lot of students went to the United States on a Fulbright, and the program is called Masses, and it's something that is really important. To have a Fulbright is extremely prestigious, and it immediately propels you in the U.S. in some kind of excellence, which is important. So that the Fulbright definitely has contributed a lot to our cultural exchanges and to Moroccans going to the United States and engaging with U.S. education, higher education. So there's that, so education and culture. And then, and so people also aspire to that. The Fulbright became a kind of alternative to France, to Spain, to staying here. It didn't have to be, you didn't have to come from the French system. You could come from the Moroccan system and be promising and be sent abroad. So it was kind of liberating in that sense. But also, historical homes, like the one we have in the Consul General's home in Casablanca, which has this whole history of World War II, of Churchill, of all these signatures, of this whole history of war and how it came into Africa, and how Churchill and Roosevelt sat in this home and what it means. And so for Moroccans, this space means something, at least for people in Casablanca, this space means something historically. We are linked to the West, we are linked to Europe. This is indeed a global war. So that space is important in that sense. Afterwards, whether this is an actual, how do we understand this imaginary? That is something that is extremely personal. And of course, there's the American legation, in Tangiers, which is the only U.S. National Historic Landmark located in a foreign country. So it's really interesting. Well, Tangiers was an international city, so it's really interesting that there is that space as well, which is in the old Medina, and also is, you know, in a city like Tangiers, it's really this kind of myth and magic and very fashionable and glamorous. So there's. If I were to think about our cultural exchanges and how the U.S. is viewed in our imaginary, there is, and I'm not talking about political or economic, but there is a real, whether it's Paul Bowles, a real poetic imaginary, and that poetic is also, I don't want to say colonial, but it's glamorous, and it's glamorous means it's even above upper class or luxury. It's this kind of domain that we will never aspire, that we can only aspire to, that we can never reach. So I see that as part of some kind of, you know, appeal of the United States to Morocco. So literature is there from the very beginning, with people like Paul Bowles, with poetry. Again, when Moroccan analysts or theoreticians look at Paul Bowles or analyze, they will be extremely critical. If you see it from a more distant lens or a thick description, like Clifford Geertz would say, you would think this is wonderful. This is about being international. This is there's some essence here to being Moroccan. But then the minute the surface of these things are scratched, there's some kind of colonial aspect, some kind of Orientalism there that that appears. So there is a kind of, for me, an Orientalist dimension to these Moroccan-American cultural exchanges, but that have survived through the years, and that have also allowed us to have a kind of more or less benign relationship with the United States, which other countries do not have, and which allows us to aspire today to English, even more so. So of course there's the internet, but there's the younger crowd, the youth are very much interested in the United States, in its culture, in its soft power, in its language, in its movies, etc., etc. So this is something that is important today, is that these spaces that were at some point on a poetic level, at an imaginary level, may be more up there, maybe more elusive, are now becoming more democratic in a sense, because the young are via the internet as well, are taking control of this narrative and this language, and have no fear when it comes to speaking English and to engaging in English. So 3 minutes. So, all right. So this is what I wanted to talk about. But also, again, my question would be, how balanced are these cultural exchanges between us and the United States? And so this is something we need to think about, because in the United States, we do not have the same kind of impact that they have on us. And so what kind of a future do we want for these exchanges between the United States? Is there a way to make our exchanges maybe more balanced, regardless of the difference of scale and scope between the United States and Morocco? Is there a way for us to also engage the United States in a more dynamic way, and perhaps deepen, but also control maybe these Moroccan-American cultural exchanges, and to present ourselves into a future, perhaps in a different way? These are the questions that I would be interested in, that I do not have a question and don't have answer to now. But this is, I think, something really important when we discuss exchange, is that we discuss some kind of real bilateral engagement, back and forth engagement between us and even a country like the United States. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my work, but we don't have time as well. I read in English, and so yeah, and for me it's very personal. Also, Moroccan-American cultural exchanges for me is a very personal endeavor as well. not ideological, but personal. Okay, thank you. I'm okay?
Thank you so much. I'm sorry that I had to stop you this time. I'm sure I would have liked to give you more time if I had available. So our next speaker is Professor Anwar Majid. Anwar Majid is Professor of English at the University of New England. He is the author of numerous books, but I would like to mention one, Islam in America, Building a Future Without Prejudice. He's also the author of 2 novels, to my knowledge at least. One that I have a copy of, and I think I have a copy of it here, so maybe at the end I would ask him to sign it for me. So he conceived and built UNA in Tangier, campus in Tangier, and he's on a sabbatical leave and has been on various campuses in Morocco. He's always solicited, and he always gets lots of crowds when he speaks. We are honored to have him today, and he's going to speak on the topic Curious Episodes in Moroccan-American Relations. So Anwar, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I hope. Hello? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Karim. Thank you so much, Hani and Graham, for joining us. Thank you for the crowd. When I think about American-Moroccan relations, or relationships, if you will, I think of myself, rather, I think of somebody who spent more than 40 years in the United States, going back and forth, making that, what the French call the navette, the commute. And in this process, I was able to measure the tenor, if you will, of this relationship, not just academically, but also socially and otherwise. But today, I want to mention very briefly 3 things that I came across in the course of my scholarship and my study of this relationship. One of them, both of them, 2 of them fall under the umbrella of what's called captivity narratives. You may, for the longest time, even before the American Revolution, they were American ships sailing in the Mediterranean, and occasionally they would clash with Muslims along the Mediterraneans, and they would be held captive in some circumstances. And very early on in the 17th century, none other than Cotton Mather, a very prominent clergyman in New England in the United States, had some very fancy word to say about Mulay Ismail. He didn't like him very much because he held white Christians captive, and so there is that mention in the goodness of God in Cotton Mather's work, which is very intriguing. So in this case, Morocco doesn't appear in a very positive light. The second case also, it's a captivity narrative, and I brought a book of mine to read you a couple of passages because it illustrates an incredible impact by Moroccans on the course of American politics, especially the shaping of the Civil War. It's a very obscure episode. It's a literary text. It falls under the category of captivity narratives. Again, these are the narratives of people who had been captured by Muslims in the Mediterranean and eventually were released or found their way to freedom, and then they wrote their stories to American audiences to influence them in one way or the other. So sometimes, as in the case of Cotton Mather, they were trying to tell them that Islam was bad. And so that message was also widespread. It was embraced by the founding fathers, for example. But then there was another message that came out of these captivity narratives, which are the stories by sailors, American sailors who were captured by Muslims, and then they were released, and then they were able to tell their stories. And I'm going to read you a couple of what I wrote about one of these books by James Riley to give you a sense of the enormity of the impact that that these stories had in a very positive way on American readership. So this is from a book by James Riley, who was captured, whose ship was wrecked along the coast of something like the Moroccan Sahara near Mauritania. The membership, the crew survived, but they were treated very badly by some nomads. They were enslaved, they were tortured, they were punished, until two Moroccan guys, brothers from Essaouira, were traveling to the Sahel, and they had pity on these Americans, and after some hesitation on the part of one of the brothers, they were able to buy their freedom and take them away and take them with them. And so I'm going to read. This is what I wrote about this episode. Once the ship is wrecked and the crew members reach the desert shore, they're continually menaced and attacked by natives, variously called Arabs and savages, whose ferocious features fall somewhere between those of an Indian and a black. In these fierce moments of survival, the Americans, whose numbers includes one black man and no woman, are saved miraculously and later drift along the bank. So basically they reach the coast. And so Riley, the leader of this American group, and blistered and burnt, Riley bravely manages to hope for redemption, even extending his hand to his comrades. He tells his masters, the people now who are enslaving him, that he knows the Sultan of Morocco, Moulay Suleiman, personally, insisting that the Sultan, quote, was a friend to me and my nation. The Arabs don't believe Riley, but they save his life until two Moroccan brothers, on their way to buy ostrich feathers, happen upon the group. The elder of the two brothers, Sidi Ahmed, or Sidi Hamed in this account, listened to Riley's story and burst out crying, and so moved is he by his plight. Resisted by his brother, Said, Sidi Ahmed nevertheless prevails and gambles his capital on the four Americans, who promise to compensate him upon their delivery to Suera in Morocco. En route, Riley and his four companions discover couscous and kebabs, the most delicious food and best meat they'd ever had, better than beefsteak, and notice the cleanliness of Arabs. Riley reflects on the geography of the desert, and all five slaves, for that's what they consider themselves, begin to believe in their redemption when they reach walled towns and rich agricultural regions whose lands are tilled by industrious people. So they go to the Atlas, and from there, the land of abundance brings to Riley's mind the ancient Jewish history, the land of Canaan, as he later says in the ethnographic section of his book. So basically, they reach Suera, and from Suera they make their way to Tangier, and then of course they go back to the United States, having been saved by two Moroccan brothers from the depredations of these nomad Arabs. However, the narrative which was read by more than 1 million Americans, which influenced an American to name his son Sidi Ahmed, and which so inspired Abraham Lincoln that he considered it one of the most influential books in his early life, was like other narratives conceived to promote the universal ideal of liberty that the American Revolution was supposed to enshrine. And so this is an incredible example of how, I don't know whether I am being a little bit biased towards Moroccan ways of life, but these two Moroccan brothers, they're basically merchants, gambled all their money to save these wretched Americans to get their freedom, and then eventually they were paid back. And these Americans were so grateful, they go back to the United States and write their story. James Riley does. And he has this impact on so many people, including people naming their children Sidi Ahmed, and Abraham Lincoln was also heavily influenced by this. So I would have loved to write a fictional account of this story and have it into a mini-series or whatever. But somebody in this room might be able to do so. Maybe Manny, who's a talented novelist. So with this episode, and I want to mention one more thing, that the Tangier also is, I'm from Tangier, so as you know, Tangier has a special place in this American Moroccan cultural exchange. The American legation was a gift of Moulay Slimane, and now recently it has been back in the news. The State Department is willing to spend some money to refurbish it. And then, not to mention another one that's not very well known, Cap Spartel, the lighthouse that sits between the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. The United States was one of 6 nations that had contributed to building that, and basically spend and was able to appropriate money from Congress to do so for a long period of time. So the and that was the first national treaty the United States, or multinational treaty the United States had ever signed. So it's very interesting that these are little episodes in Moroccan-American relations, outside from those very well-known ones, the first nation to recognize independence and the letters between George Washington and the Sultan and so on and so forth. But Morocco, being such a small country in the world, yet had this little significant impact on the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anwar. Our third speaker is Graham Cornwall. He's a scholar at Institute of Middle East Studies at George Washington University. He served as a senior assistant dean for research and special initiative at George Washington Elliott School of International Affairs for 5 years. He currently directs the Moroccan American Studies Initiative, a podcast and open access resource for teaching about the history of U.S.-Moroccan relations. He holds a PhD from Georgetown University and MA in Middle East Studies from George Washington University. His topic, or his paper, is on mercenaries, journalists, and diplomats, Americans in the Reef War, 1921-1926. And I would like to say that I have known Graham for a number of years, and I had the pleasure to collaborate on a number of initiatives he has wonderfully conducted. And it's a pleasure to see him again. And he's always, available and helpful. Thank you very much, Corey.
Always available. I don't know, is that a compliment? Since we're talking about Moroccan-American cultural relations, cultural exchanges, I have to say that it was about 10 years ago that I was on a train with my then pregnant wife. She's still my wife. She was then pregnant. And she taps me. I was falling asleep, and she says, "Hey, that guy over there is grading papers in English." And it was Nourdine Bejit, brother of Karim. And so I introduced myself and struck up a friendship, and he introduced me to Karim, and here I am today. So, a huge part of my work and my career I owe to Moroccan friendliness and generosity, and you opening doors and sharing your culture with me, and I'm extremely grateful, especially to Hafsa and to Karim today. We mentioned the Moroccan American Studies Initiative. This is a little thing that I've been doing with support from the embassy and from Talim, Tangier American Legation, trying to open up stories about Moroccans who came to America and Americans who came to Morocco, and found interest in those two places and sort of facilitated these exchanges. So we have people like Leila Lalami, the novelist, talking about Estebanico, from Azamori, the slave who came to the U.S., or what was not then the U.S., but in the 16th century, and sort of an explorer, conquistador, a wild story. But we also have stories about the nationalist movement, Moroccans who came to New York City and were lobbying for for independence in the United Nations, and also with influential Americans. And that's part of the Moroccan American Studies Initiative, which you can find at MoroccanAmericanStudies.com. Check it out when you have a chance. But so friendship between these two countries is kind of a strange lens from which I'm going to try to talk about a group of Americans who basically volunteered to bomb Moroccan villages, to drop bombs on Moroccan villages in the 1920s, but here we are anyway. I'm talking about what it eventually was called excuse my French, it's not so good, the Escadrille de la Garde Chérifienne. This is a group of about 20 American aviators, pilots, who volunteered to fight with the French army against Abdel Karim in the Rif War, right? So in 1924, the Rif War starts in 1921. It's 1924 that a sort of wandering, wealthy American, a mercenary named Charles Sweeney. He was in Paris. He had the idea through some friends who were French military officers to put together a group of American pilots to volunteer to help fly missions in Morocco into the Rif to help with the French effort against Abdel Karim's forces. Now, this guy Sweeney was a friend of Ernest Hemingway. He had fought in half a dozen wars in countries around the world, so this guy, he'll fight anywhere. He doesn't really care who he's fighting for. He fought in Nicaragua, Venezuela, Poland, Mexico, and then France during World War I. He was actually the leader, or one of the two leaders, of what was called the Escadrille Lafayette, which was a squadron of American pilots who volunteered before the United States had entered World War I to fight on behalf of the French against the Central Powers. So he decides to get together to basically bring that group of pilots back together and fight for France against Abdel Karim. He brings on one of his old friends, a guy named Paul Rockwell. And they start organizing and recruiting in Paris and in France Americans who have stayed behind and they know that are still in Europe to help to join the cause. By spring of 1924, there are about 15 American pilots who make the trip to Morocco. They're all American. At least they had ties to America. A couple of them just had one American parent. But what were they doing, and why would they join this war that has very little to do with America? And I think that there are two important answers, or two important things to consider. The first is that, to be perfectly honest, that they held very pro-French, very pro-imperial, and I would say even pretty racist viewpoints about the war. They believe that, and I'm quoting here from Sweeney, France, in fighting Abdel Karim, is fighting the cause of the white man's civilization. And all who have formed this squadron know enough about the world to appreciate what the white man's civilization means. So that's kind of where they're coming from ideologically. And the second is that the French were really behind this effort. This was a massive, it was a strategic public relations, a propaganda campaign to build support for the war, for the French effort in the war specifically, in the United States and abroad. So everywhere they went, and I mean everywhere, from the minute this whole project is conceived in Paris, photographers, journalists, newsreel, crews follow them around. It's very well publicized that there are Americans that are joining the fight against Abdel Karim in Morocco. They meet with he's then the Minister of Defense, I believe, Aristide Briand. He becomes the Prime Minister. They meet with the editor of Le Matin, the ambassador to the U.S. There are parties, toasts. They're sort of feted wherever they go. Once they get to Morocco, they meet with Lyautey. They have an audience several times with him. They meet with the Sultan. Their arrival is covered by all the major newspapers here in Morocco, the French press, I should say. And even back in France, Le Temps, the newspaper says, it was a fine gesture of enthusiasm and solidarity with their comrades from the Great War. So they're sort of trying to make this connection that the Great War has not really ended. This Moroccan-American alliance continues into the 1920s. Once they get to Morocco, I hope everybody can hear me. they're taking on official tours of all these projects of the protectorate. So slaughterhouses, factories, rail facilities, just sort of new housing facilities. They even take them on a tour, like a very specific, well-described tour of Bousbir, the quartier réservé. I'm sorry, Smandy. Which is there's an unpublished memoir that I found of one of the pilots, and it's his descriptions of these scenes are. I'm not going to share them with you in public. They're not appropriate to share, but they're very interesting. But okay, so back in the U.S., this is a real problem. This is the State Department believes this to be a violation of what we think. What we have is this thing called the Neutrality Act of 1794, which basically says that Americans cannot go fight against a country or a people against whom the United States has no problem, with whom we have no disagreement. So the State Department makes a concerted effort to cut off really any contact with these people. They won't support them. They won't help with visas. They won't help with travel arrangements, nothing. And they warn them in writing that they may be breaking the law. They may be breaking this Neutrality Act that is now, 150 years old at this point. So then that's when France decides to rename the squadron. They were going to call them the Escadrille Lafayette again, but they decide to change the name and become the Escadrille de la Garde Chérifienne. Or I just call them the Escadrille Chérifienne, or sometimes I just call them the squadron because my French is not so good. And this is an attempt to show them that they're fighting for the Sultan, who is a U.S. ally, against rebels from his own country, rather than fighting for the French in their efforts to pacify Morocco. And I think this is where we see that the structure of the protectorate, the legal basis of the protectorate, is really important for U.S.-Morocco relations, and U.S.-France relations too. Of course, the State Department does not really accept this. They eventually pressure France to disband the squadron of pilots with the threat of denaturalization, that is like the, taking away citizenship from the American pilots themselves. Before they do that, they fly, the squadron itself starts flying missions in August 1925. By November 1925, they're disbanded, or mid-November. But they fly around 400 missions. They brag about dropping over 40 tons. I don't know how many kilos that is, but it's a lot. 40 tons of bombs in the Rif, the Jebela, the Huerga Valley. In their very first mission, Rockwell, he's one of the two kind of leaders, he claims to have struck a ravine where he knew some Rifi soldiers were hiding. He hits a herd of cattle because he wants to hit the enemy's supply of meat. And he strikes a mountain village. I don't know which one, but that's what he says. And then in September, this is sort of famous, they bomb Chefchaouen. This is kind of their most famous and infamous act as a unit. Rockwell later writes that while flying over the city, it looked lovely from the air, but he hoped his bombs did not strike the numerous sanctuaries, 6 mosques, and the big square with a fountain. We all know the square if you've been to Chefchaouen, obviously in front of the Kasbah. But this is actually pretty unpopular with Americans. In newspapers, they get really criticized. There are several journalists who are on the ground who are actually even eventually conduct interviews with Abdel Karim, but are reporting from Tangier and even Tetuan and even Fez about the war and negatively about it. So public opinion in the U.S., generally speaking, at least if we're just looking at newspaper coverage, is pro Abdel Karim, is sort of anti-colonial. And that's when these pilots start hearing from relatives, they start hearing feedback, and one of them writes that we learned that we were baby killers, that our principal occupation was just the burning of crops of peaceful farmers. And it's not something that they actually dispute, I should say. So, where does this get us? It's a very short episode. I mean, obviously, we have 4 months that this group of pilots is operating, but I think it's actually really interesting about American-Moroccan relations because it says a lot about the depth of the friendship. And my conclusion is it might seem biased. I'm an American, but I think the sources back this up. The official U.S. position, the position of the State Department, the position of the U.S. government, is the right position in terms of international law, but it's also the right position in terms of the friendship. The U.S. in this moment recognizes that the Sultan's sovereignty is not sort of real sovereignty. It's a nominal sovereignty, that these pilots aren't serving on behalf of the Sultan. They're serving on behalf of the French, and they dispute France's position that the Sultan is really sovereign in Morocco. And I think that it's a powerful moment where the U.S. could have easily stepped back and said, France is an ally, it's a major power. We have no real interest in this. We can just side with our friends. But instead, they're very clear that these pilots are not. It's not okay to fight this war on behalf of the French. It's not okay to sort of violate this sense of sovereignty. Am I out of time? All right, cool. خلاص. شكرا بزاف.
Again, apologies to every one of you. We only have 1 hour, and we want to give some time to our audience for maybe questions. But before that, I would use my little power to ask you some broad questions. One is more like a comment to Professor Mahani Alawi. I would concur with your conclusions. I'm also sharing a lot of interest with our colleagues here. I am interested in U.S.-Moroccan cultural relations, history, and done a bit of research and publication in the field. I've noticed that the narratives about Barbary, and that connects with your presentations, are also very American-centered, and they only project the American perspective. So we're still talking about Barbary pirates. Obviously, they would extend that beyond Morocco to Algerians and Libyans or Tripolitans, etc. But that narrative still seems to persist, rather than corsairs, rather than a much more complex economic, social, political structure. It's usually, reduced to just parasitical acts against American maritime activities. So that narrative still needs to be redressed. But perhaps we are responsible. We are not promoting alternative perspectives on the shared histories with Europeans and with Americans and the rest of the world. This one footnote you could add to the story that I happen to know about James Riley. He suffered not only during his own period in Morocco, and actually he suffered much more with American bureaucracy, because he was the one who carried the lions, the first group of lions, because there are 2 stories, one in 1931. So he was convinced by the American consul to carry them. And when he carried them, the Americans just protested that we're not going to pay him. And until his death, he pleaded Congress for reimbursement of the expenses incurred for taking the lions. And so he really suffered, and I think a sequel to Riley, you'll find that sort of thing. Something else I would like to say also to this tragic incident of American contributing to the French aggression against the Reef, but also other periods. Of course, there is a journalist, just to confirm your point, is a wonderful narrative published in 1908 by Frederick Moore called The Passing of Morocco, which is a book based on I don't want to talk too much, I'm sorry, but it was just very a detailed report of the French campaign in Casablanca, the Shoya campaign. And the book is full of graphic images of aggressions, of shooting people in Sharia. And he was there and he recorded that, and he obviously condemned all of those atrocities. They would, surround a village and would give them the illusion that they're not going to shoot them, but suddenly they would just, have a squad firing at them. On the other hand, we have the American government this time signing a deal with the French concerning the military bases. And that remains like a big question. Why would the Americans do that? I'm taking you away from the topic, but while the Americans maintain that line of not intervening in European or French Moroccan relations, sometimes they deviated from that line. But I'll give you the floor to respond and also to the audience to ask questions.
I have a question for him. That's a fascinating account. Is there any relationship between these guys and Edith Wharton's views of... okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so Edith Wharton, an American novelist, maybe some people know her. Americans know her as someone they were forced to read under pain of death in high school and don't really care for as an author. But she came to Morocco. She wrote this travel account, I think 1921. The connection is really that Edith Wharton was also a guest, and her entire trip was sort of sponsored by the Protectorate. So really, I mean, as an official account as it gets, and you can find this on our podcast, but Edith Wharton was a very well-connected, extraordinarily well-connected in the most elite circles in New York City and in Washington, as well as in Paris, had lived in Paris for some time. So, it's a continuation of the French, I think, really a propaganda campaign, a PR campaign to sort of spread the word about the progress, the gift of the Protectorate, all the things that they're giving to Morocco.
If you have any comments.
I have a very simple answer or comment to what you were saying, but how can we re-engage these perspectives and these histories? It's an answer I give to many questions, actually, is to read and study Edward Said's Orientalism in schools, not just universities, but also in high schools, and to impregnate, those ideas very, very quickly in the minds and hearts of students and Moroccans. Yeah. That's my answer.
The question also of Orientalism that comes up occasionally and frequently, I would say, in terms of American-Moroccan or Moroccan-Arab relations. And I address some of this in my book, Islam in America. But for the longest time, until the early 20th century, until actually the middle of the 20th century, more specifically until 1948, for the reasons you know, the two main things in the 20th century is the discovery and the power of oil and the creation of the State of Israel. And so these are things that have fundamentally changed the relationship between the United States and Muslims and Arabs in general. But up till then, at the early part of the 20th century, people in the Middle East would have, in fact, polls were taken, they would have preferred to have an American mandate over them than French or British colonialism. And intriguingly, I came across an article was published in Foreign Affairs in 1943 by Graham Stewart. I don't know whether you're aware of this, in which he argues that the Sultan Sidi Mohammed bin Abd al-Rahman, in 1871, made a statement to this effect that he'd rather have American mandate over Morocco than have deal with French or European colonialism. So the article is available in the issue of Foreign Affairs 1943, and Graham also wrote a book about, I think it's Morocco, Tangier. It's a very interesting one. So the image of America was more complex than the image of France or Britain or Europeans in general in the Arab Muslim mind up until the middle of the 20th century.
All right. I think we have about 9 minutes for questions. If you want to please make your question straightforward and introduce yourself, please.
Yes, okay, excuse me. Good evening. How are you, everybody? Thank you for your introductions and for your speech or presentation about American-Moroccan relationships. Before that, I am a teacher of English here in Morocco. I have been teaching English for many years, private teacher, okay, by the way. Please, I want now to ask to what extent this kind of relationship between Morocco and America can transcend to reach other nations where armed conflicts arise. Because I have understood the American values in terms of tolerance, in terms of coexistence. Many nationalities coexist together, like Morocco too. Many people, they come here and they coexist together. To what extent this kind of relation can transcend other places or other areas where war exists. Okay? Thank you.
Paraphrase. I think if I get his question right, he says, why can't we promote that type of relationship that exists between U.S. and Morocco and make it a model that other countries can follow?
No, if I understood it right, it was like, can we still have these relationships between Morocco and the U.S. with what is happening elsewhere in terms of war?
That's very different from what I understand. Okay. Oh, yeah.
I didn't mean to pick up the mic. That's difficult. I think two things come to mind. One, that I do think the Moroccan-American relationship is a model. It's been really remarkably good for 250 years without really any major conflict. And part of that is because our immediate shared interests have never been super great, super big, and that, there is a power imbalance. That's obviously true. I think that, I've been very curious and very interested in having conversations with Moroccans this past week about what's happening in Israel and Gaza, because I think it's a test, and I think Americans don't fully appreciate, if I'm being honest, about how far concern over this situation stretches. Like we're nowhere close to Gaza right now. We might even be closer to Brazil geographically than we are to Gaza in this place, and yet, there's a strong attachment to what's happening there. People care deeply about it. They talk about it. They've asked me about it and the American role in it. And I think Americans in general don't really appreciate how far concern over this thing stretches, and that Morocco is Moroccans are also taking note of how the United States deals with this issue. That's not really an answer to the question, but I don't know if it'll test American-Moroccan relations. Probably not, like in practical terms. But I think it doesn't necessarily help.
Okay, so another sort of sticking issue in this relationship between Morocco and the United States. The American Revolution was a revolution against the monarchy, and for the Americans are always a little bit uncomfortable with the fact that Morocco has this well-established monarchy and so on and so forth, because they are deeply Republican values. And I remember one of the ambassadors to the United States, Kaplan, if you remember him, he was given an interview on TV, on PBS, I think it was, And he was asked about this very specific question about whether there's this freedom in Morocco under this form of government we have in Morocco. And he really struggled to answer that question because of the mainstream belief in the United States that only a Republican form of government and a democracy like it exists in the United States is the best way to be to have freedom. And I managed to reach, at that time, the head of the American legation, Jeff Loftus, in Tangier, and I gave him a little message to send to share with Kaplan, who was an ambassador of the United States, quoting from On the Jewish State by Herzl, who is the great theoretician of the Jewish state. And when he was writing that book, he did not endorse a democratic form of government for the envisioned state of Israel. He thought of an aristocracy or some kind of arrangement of that sort. And so it is, I believe that what we have in Morocco, the political system we have in Morocco, which I've called previously a sultanic democracy, is unique in the world. It doesn't exist in the Arab world because of the circumstances. There is no such thing as democracy or republicanism in Islamic political science or Islamic political theory. So what we have is an incredible political arrangement that it cannot be reproduced in other Arab or Muslim countries because of historical reasons. And so it gives us a stability and a way to negotiate even with powers like the United States and still maintain our identities and ways of being. So this is Morocco's contribution in indirect ways, I guess, to this relationship.
Maybe Dr. Hafsa want to ask a
Yes.
question.
First of all, I'm very, very happy to have gathered four brilliant professors and really enjoyed every one of your talks. Just react to what you've just said, Dr. Anwar Majid. The difference between this country and other Arab countries is that it's one of the oldest kingdoms in the world, and we have layers. I was invited in 2002 north of England, where Moroccans were building Hadrian's Wall with Hadrian, with Caesar, Hadrian. Okay, I was invited as a Moroccan poet writing in English, and okay, so you realize that this is a very old country. And just yesterday, in fact, there was a panel discussion on the relationship between Morocco and England, and we're talking about hundreds of years of relations, and there are some juicy anecdotes about King John in the 13th century begging our Sultan, then Muntasir, to please help him against the French. So if we teach history in that way, not to show supremacy or anything, but simply for young Moroccans to realize how this country has a lot to say to the world, okay? And now I would like to come back to what you said about Orientalism, and especially what you said about Tangier, okay? There's some, some things that happen that are quite funny. I was with Mohamed Choukri in Casablanca. He was signing his book on Paul Bowles, Le Reclus de Tanger, the day Paul Bowles died. So there are interesting things like that. And that was a reaction to that. You also have other Tangier writers like Mukhtar Shawi, who do react to this. Okay, it is there. Tangier was a place where Paul Bowles lived, where Perdicaris almost won us bombarding from the United States. But there is real awareness now of taking our history in our hands and dealing with the other. Graham, you mentioned something that I shouldn't be mentioning, but I will. Prosper. Busbir. Prosper. Okay, I belong. In fact, I'm due Saturday and Friday in Casablanca, but I won't be there. But I belong to Casa Mémoire. And this is about the history of Casablanca. So we show people the door from which Lyoté came to Morocco and things like that. So, and if you're staying long enough, I'll be glad to make a special visit for you. But I would like to have this this reference about Busbir. If you, and maybe one last thing is that my father met in 1953. He met Abdelkarim Khattabi in Tangier, and Abdelkarim Khattabi told him, "Okay, my father was a young man, and he said, okay, tell me about every arm France is producing." So my father started telling him, this and this and this and that. And he said, my son, this is absolutely nothing under the power of God. يعني هادشي لا شيء أمام إرادة الله. So thank you.
Thank you. I think we have 3 minutes to conclude this. So we got a signal that we have to leave. Well, we were able to secure 3 extra minutes. So in case someone wants to ask a question, very quick question. Go ahead.
How we can read like the Moroccan American cultural exchanges through like movie productions? Sorry, how we can trace and also like read the Moroccan American cultural exchange through like movie productions, and it comes to my mind 2 big movies. The first movie, like The Wind and the Lion of Sean Connery, and second one, like Casablanca. So like Humphrey Bogart and the Swedish scholar. And the second question, it's about the crash of the airplane of Eisenhower near Chefchaouen. He has been rescued by someone from Chefchaouen at that time, and he has been given, the Moroccan I'm talking about now, he has been offered the American citizenship, but he never went like to the States. Do you know a little bit about this kind of stuff? His name is, I guess, Radi, or I don't know. But it's in the American archives, I guess.
Chaouen is an intriguing place.
Respond to The Wind and the Lion and
Casablanca. Is your question how do Americans?
How we can mention Moroccan American like exchange through like movie production, like American from American. So like the movement, like
That's
movie like Sean Connery about recently, like the American army, American Marines, U.S. Marines, were about like to and of course, sorry.
I'll let you answer.
Complicated question. One thing I'd say, there's a lot of like imaginative geography that goes into these films. Casablanca, as you know, not only not filmed at all in Casablanca, no Moroccan actors, only one Moroccan character, a guy named Abdul, who opens the door, who is played by an American. But I think that actually, if we look at the cinematography of Casablanca, it's not new. It's drawing on a legacy of American Orientalist painters, Western Orientalist painters, but also Americans specifically, that are creating an image. It doesn't come out of nowhere that Casablanca looks like it does in Hollywood. And I do think that is that's important. We see a continuity. We sort of switch mediums from painting to film, but it is new. Rather, it's not new. And I'd say that Casablanca continues to resonate with Americans. It's hugely popular still. It shapes the way a lot of, especially an older generation, but sees Morocco, and romanticizes Morocco.
Exactly.
But it's also not negative, you know. I mean, it doesn't really have a negative
No,
balance,
no.
but it does have an Orientalist one a little bit. You know, there's always shades of
I
that.
just would like to add that I taught Casablanca as a film to Moroccans. And at one point they say, we are in the middle of the desert. Casablanca in the middle of the desert. And also, do you know that Humphrey Bogart has a great-grandmother that is Moroccan? They belong to the family of Van Saleh in America. So Van Saleh, yeah, Jan Janssen is his great-grandfather, him and Jacqueline Kennedy. Thank you.
Well, I think we'll draw the curtains. Thank you very much. This has been a fascinating panel, and we enjoyed the presentation. I'm sure there are a lot of questions in your mind, but we'll probably ask them another day. Thank you very much.